Legends and myths are essential to understand the Pokémon universe. From its creation to real-life legends we heard as kids, in this iceberg we'll unearth the many stories of the Pokémon franchise. Welcome to the Pokémon Legends and Myths iceberg.
Say my name. Eisenberg. You're goddamn right.
Mew made Pokémon what it is. Red and Green made their debut in Japan in 1996 with 150 Pokémon to catch, or that's what people initially thought. This concept changed when rumors about a secret Pokémon spread. A Pokémon that not even Nintendo was aware of its existence. Mew was programmed into the game after the debugging process was completed, which is typically not advised in game development. But this risky move made Pokémon what it is today, and the reason why it made it outside of Japan. When players in Japan began reporting the existence of a secret Pokémon discovered through glitches, the rumors spread like wildfire, causing the game's sales to skyrocket within weeks and prompting their localization for an international release. If there hadn't been just enough space for one more Pokémon, and if Shigeki Morimoto hadn't decided to include the elusive Mew, the fate of Pokémon might have remained confined to Japan. Mew under the truck. Imagine an ancient creature, whispered to be the very ancestor of all Pokémon, a being worshipped as a god by lost forgotten civilizations. Its power is said to summon earthquakes, ignite flames, unleash toxic seas, and learn every move known to any Pokémon in existence. Now, where would such a mythical elusive entity dwell? Beneath an ancient frozen lake? In the uncharted depths of the ocean? Atop the highest peak in the world? Or perhaps hidden in some distant corner of the galaxy? Or maybe, just maybe, under a truck? As many of you know, there's a unique sprite of a truck to the east of the SSN, an area inaccessible under normal circumstances. Rumors began to swirl that this truck was the hiding place of Mew. Some speculated that using strength would move the truck and reveal the mythical Pokémon. This myth, now a beloved part of Pokémon lore, has been acknowledged by Game Freak. In fact, subtle nods to this legendary rumor can be found in the Gen 1 remakes, with items placed near the truck as a tribute to one of the most iconic myths in video game history. Legendary Bug Pokémon. The bug type was the only type that could have defeated Psychic Pokémon if it had had decent moves. Considering I can only think about String Shot and Twin Needle, no wonder it was terrible. Not only that, but even after almost 30 years, not a single legendary Pokémon has been given the bug type. It's true that Arceus and Silvally can hold items to become bug types, but we're talking about Pokémon that don't need anything else. Will Pokémon take a legendary bug into consideration for Generation 10? Arcanine. One of the members of the legendary quartet in Generation 1, at least according to the second episode of the Pokémon anime. Arcanine is a legendary Pokémon, at least in China. But wait, nowadays all those references to the real world are being erased. No Pacific Ocean, no Indian elephants, no South America, just a Pokémon that appears in Eastern folklore. There may have been a true legendary Pokémon similar to Arcanine that was originally intended to be the box art legendary for Pokémon Silver before Lugia's creation as the master of the legendary beasts. This would have made more sense, as all the legendaries would have been quadrupeds. Articuno through binoculars. A nice detail in Generation 1 is that if you go to Route 15 and go to the second floor of the building that connects with Fuchsia City, you can look through some binoculars and see a shining bird flying towards the sea, meaning Articuno. Due to an oversight, however, after having caught Articuno on the Seafoam Islands, you can still see it. This could be caused by the fact that Articuno was so far away that even after the player catches it, the light that came from the bird is still traveling, and we can see it the way it was in the past, in the same fashion as we can see the light of stars that no longer exist. It's either this or a Generation 1 oversight. Moltres in Victory Road. Legendary Pokémon are generally found in remote, hard-to-get places such as Articuno or Lugia, but it's always baffled me that Moltres could be found in Victory Road, next to a random NPC that doesn't seem to acknowledge its presence. This Pokémon was later taken to the summit of Mount Ember, a more suitable place for this phoenix-inspired bird. Even in Hard Gold and Soul Silver, this legendary is located on Mount Silver. I guess Game Freak realized that having a legendary at Plains Side was off and decided to relocate it. At least in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee there's nobody around, but I guess it's because these games only have the Kanto region and not a lot of extra space to put it somewhere else. GS Ball. Who can forget the GS Ball given to Ash by Professor Ivy for the purpose of investigating its contents? For those unaware of its fate, it was ultimately left with Kurt for all eternity, as director and storyboard artist Masamitsu Hidaka intended for the audience to forget about this gold and silver Pokeball, which was meant to contain Celebi and join Ash and his friends in a similar way to Meloetta in Pokémon the series Black and White. However, since Celebi starred the 4th Pokémon movie, they decided to abandon this key item that does summon Celebi in Pokémon Crystal. Rotom was a legendary. I'm almost certain that Rotom was originally intended to be a legendary Pokémon during the development of Diamond and Pearl. The strongest clue is the legendary battle theme that plays when you encounter it. Some might say that this was a developer oversight, but the same theme was carried over into the remakes. Celebi event in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Aside from the iconic Celebi event in Pokémon Crystal, Game Freak gave us another opportunity to explore the mysterious powers of the mythical time-traveling Pokémon. This time we're taken back to a period shortly after Giovanni's defeat and the disbandment of Team Rocket. Here we learn that Silver is Giovanni's son, and later discover that the former gym leader has been hiding away in a cave at the Tojo Falls, isolated from the world, listening to his man's pleas for his return through a radio. After we defeat him, Giovanni leaves the cave and we hear a strange sound that many speculate could be a body hitting the water, while others believe it's just the radio. It's interesting that the player's intervention may have been the very reason Giovanni chose not to return, further weakening Team Rocket's power. First catchable mythical Pokémon.
No way. Oh my gosh! What? What? Deoxys!
If you look for Deoxys reactions in Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you won't be disappointed. The Delta episode in the 3rd generation remakes gave us one of the biggest surprises at the time, as for the first time ever, a mythical Pokémon was finally catchable in a main series Pokémon game. No DLC, no mystery gift, but an actual part of the story. And no, Deoxys is not a legendary Pokémon as stated in the official guide to legendary and mythical Pokémon. This misconception arose from the very fact that Deoxys was available in these games without any special requirements. Nowadays, mythical Pokémon are less hard to obtain in recent games. Misty's Water legendary Pokémon. In the episode Enlighten Up, while Misty meditates, she thinks about a water legendary Pokémon that strongly resembles Mega Gyarados, many years before Mega Evolutions were a thing. It might be a coincidence, but it could also be that they drew inspiration from this imaginary Pokémon. Nerfed legendaries. No Pokémon could match Mewtwo in the 1st generation, but this changed in Gold and Silver with the introduction of the Dark and Steel type, and also due to the special stats splitting into Special Attack and Special Defense. However, a pair of Pokémon whose actual base stat was reduced in a future Pokémon game was Zacian and Zamazenta. They lost 10 points in their Hero of Many Battles form and 20 in their Crown form. Registeel Salute. The Steel member of the Regi trio sparked controversy with its sprite in the English, Korean and Japanese versions of Diamond and Pearl. He appears extending its arm in a similar way to a Nazi salute, so it was redesigned for Platinum and Heart Gold and Soul Silver to avoid this controversy. Meltan and Melmetal's origin. While considered Gen 7 Pokémon, Melton and its evolution aren't considered Alolan Pokémon and instead belong to an unknown region. With the release of Pokémon Go and the fact that they debuted there, many consider that this mythical Pokémon belong to our world within the context of Pokémon Go. Questionable legendary and mythical Pokémon. Although it's clear which Pokémon are legendary and mythical, such as Ho-Oh and Mew respectively, there are others whose status is still debated to this day. There was some confusion about Deoxys, as it was originally treated as a mythical Pokémon until it was available as an obtainable Pokémon in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which gave birth to the misconception that it was a legendary Pokémon as stated in an official Pokémon guide. But without a doubt, the most controversial one is Phione, a Pokémon whose egg can be obtained by breeding Manaphy, an authentic mythical Pokémon with Ditto. Some official sources have dismissed this Pokémon as mythical or even legendary. In Pokémon Home, it was possible to trade Phione through the GTS despite it being a mythical Pokémon. However, this was later fixed, implying that the Pokémon in question is considered to be a mythical Pokémon like any other. Ultra Beasts, a group of Pokémon often considered legendary, share traits with many legendary Pokémon, such as all being gender unknown, and having at least 3 guaranteed stats with 31 IVs. Prior to Generation 8, these Pokémon were listed under the sub-legendary category, alongside Articuno, Entei, and other similar Pokémon, though some characters question whether they are Pokémon at all. Another pair of questionable legendary Pokémon are type Null and its evolution Silvally. I would guess that their status as legendary is due to the Ether Foundation conducting research on Arceus's features to create a Pokémon in its image. I don't know if there are actual legends told about Silvally outside of the Ether Foundation, but as far as I know there are none, which makes its status as a legendary Pokémon questionable. If these Pokémon were clones of Arceus, they would have more merit in being considered legends, similar to how Mewtwo is a clone of a mythical Pokémon. However, this is not the case, even though Silvally is officially considered a legendary Pokémon. Multiple legendaries. Considering that we generally have one chance of catching certain Pokémon in the games such as Mewtwo, we thought they are unique specimens, but this is not the case for all of them. First of all, there are several Articuno, such as the one in the second Pokémon movie and that owned by Frontier Brain Noland. While originally there was only a single Mewtwo, we can see a second one in Genesect and The Legend Awakened. At least 2 Mew are known to exist. The one that appeared in the first movie, which is believed to be the same Mew that Gary and Go were after, and the one from Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. Of course we have a third Mew, but since it was an artificial creation known as a Mirage Pokémon, it doesn't really count. Examples like this are everywhere, and only a few cases of unique Pokémon exist, such as Arceus that is believed to be the only one in existence. But considering the fact that there are multiple timelines and universes, an infinite amount of legendary and mythical Pokémon could exist. Regicries. Pokémon make sounds or say their name, but when it comes to the Regitrio and their master, it's almost creepy. No wonder why they were sealed away in ancient times. They sound like robots, but as if they were low on battery and infected with a computer virus. Take a listen. Weak legendary beasts. Fire Red and Leaf Green have given us the weakest legendary Pokémon ever in terms of IVs, and I'm talking about Entei, Suicune and Raikou. Due to an oversight, all stats except HP are always set to range between 0 and 5, making them extremely weak and not worth training for competitive battles. But taking into consideration not everyone owned a GameCube back then, it was the only other way to get this legendary Pokémon back in Gen 3. Tobias. If there's a mysterious trainer in the anime, that is Tobias, and he makes it into this iceberg because he owns at least a legendary and a mythical Pokémon. It would have been only natural for him to reappear at some point during Ash's adventure, but they chose to leave him shrouded in mystery, and it's likely we'll never see him again. We've seen trainers with legendary Pokémon such as Nurse Joy with a Latias, but seeing a trainer with a Latios and a Darkrai, a mythical Pokémon that at the time was the most overpowered Pokémon in existence with a combination of bad dreams and dark void, was a shock. An even more intriguing mystery is that we never saw the rest of his team. Could it be that he had more legendary and mythical Pokémon? Unfortunately, this question may remain unanswered forever. Legendary plot-free generation. Take a look at the cover art of every single main series Pokémon game and tell me which set is the odd one out. Of course Gen 1, because the rest of Pokémon on the cover are legendary Pokémon, and this reflects the story behind them, as legendary Pokémon in red, blue and yellow don't play any important roles. Although Gen 2 has legendaries on their box art, they don't play any main roles either, as the conflict centers around Team Rocket's return. This was a magical era in the Pokémon franchise, when limited internet access and the absence of data mining allowed you to explore the hidden corners of Kanto and Johto, discovering Pokémon and secrets that were scarcely mentioned anywhere. Nowadays you are forced to catch the box art legendary to make progress in the game. The original dragon. Long ago, there was a single powerful dragon Pokémon commanded by twin heroes who worked together to shape the land. But as time went by, the brothers grew apart. The older brother sought truth while the younger pursued ideals, and their differences led to conflict. As they argued, the dragon split into three: Reshiram, who stood with the brother of truth, Zekrom, who sided with the brother of ideals, and the empty shell left by the two became Kyurem. This poses the question, who was the original dragon, and how is it that Kyurem is said to have arrived with the impact of a meteorite if it already was part of the original dragon? Up to now, nobody knows for sure. Baby legendary Pokémon. We generally picture legendary Pokémon as fully developed creatures in their mature state, but at some point in their lives they must have been babies. There are two Pokémon I'm aware we've seen in their early stages, the first one being Mewtwo in the uncut story of Mewtwo's origin, and the baby Lugia that appeared in The Mysterious History. So far, I think these are the only two legendary babies ever seen. Roar Glitch. As many of you know, Roar is a move used by a wild Pokémon to escape the player, and it can bypass abilities such as Shadow Tag that would normally prevent a Pokémon from escaping. What could be worse than finding a Pokémon that immediately escapes? Well, a legendary Pokémon that escapes and disappears from the game forever. This was the case with Raikou and Entei in Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green due to a glitch. However, Suicune isn't affected by this issue, as its moveset doesn't include Roar when encountered. White Rock. A rumor related to a mythical Pokémon in Mos Dip City, the White Rock outside of the Space Center was said to hold the key to find Jirachi. The NPC close to it tells us how people at the Space Center use it as a symbol of their wish for their rockets to fly safely, elements that are present in the design of the Steel Psychic Pokémon. Maybe there were plans to link this object to an actual event, but there's no official information that confirms this. Zacian is a girl. According to the Zacian's Shield Pokédex entry, it states that some say that it's Zamazenta's elder sister. This is an odd remark, especially because both legendary Pokémon are genderless unlike the Lati duo. Deoxys on the Moon. You certainly remember the Mos Dip Space Center if you played Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald. There was an NPC that reveals the number of successful launches there have been. This number would increase each week, and it was said that once it reached a specific number, the player would be sent on a mission to the moon where Deoxys or Jirachi could be caught. This was false, but this rumor probably inspired the encounter in space with Deoxys in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Archie and Jirachi. Archie is the only villain with confirmed evidence of encountering a mythical Pokémon. In Alpha Sapphire, Shelly's room at the Team Aqua hideout contains a picture of Archie and Shelly as children with Jirachi. I've always wondered if Jirachi actually granted Shelly or Archie a wish. To have a picture with a mythical Pokémon as in posing together means that more than an encounter, these two could have had a close relationship with the wish maker. Pokégods. If you know Peekaboo, then you know the source of the Pokégods. The legend of Peekaboo started with the rumor of a Raichu evolution, and there were methods to unlock them too ridiculous to be discussed here. But believe it or not, Peekaboo is a real name that tops a company that manufactures trading cards assigned to the Pokémon that we now know as Meryl. You might think that maybe Meryl's Japanese name is Peekaboo, especially since Tops mentioned Snubble's Japanese name Buru in the same sentence as the other Pokémon. But this wasn't the case. Somebody saw a mouse Pokémon and that it was blue and thought about the name Peekaboo without Game Freak's permission, and that's when the legend was born. Another Pokégod was Yoshi. In the same fashion as EGM managed to fool the world with Shenlong in Street Fighter 2, they also messed with Pokémon fans, stating that Dragonite could evolve into Yoshi. Talking about Shenlong in Street Fighter 2, I'm planning to upload an Iceberg on this legendary fighting game, so please subscribe to the EisenBerg Experience, my alternate channel where we talk about non-Pokémon icebergs. Okay, going back to Pokémon, do you wanna know what's more ridiculous than Dragonite evolving into Yoshi? Lickitung evolving into Luigi. And this time, it was posted on Nintendo's official website back in April 1999. The infamous Venusaur that appeared in the episode The Ghost of Maiden's Peak, a combination between Venusaur and Blastoise that was made by Ghastly, was thought to appear in the Gen 1 games. Nidogod and Nidogoddess are evolutions of Nidoking and Nidoqueen respectively, and there's a really long list of them. For a more in-depth explanation, I recommend you watch the Pokégods video by Yuri of Wind. Legendary Pokémon themes differences. If you aren't paying attention, it might be difficult to notice, but Reshiram's, Zekrom and Kyurem's theme have slight differences. For the vast white Pokémon, you can hear the sound of flames, while for Zekrom, the sound of electricity. In Kyurem's theme, the beginning beats are different, and that part where you hear flames and electricity doesn't have these sounds. A way to represent the fact that Kyurem is meant to be an empty shell left behind Reshiram and Zekrom. Although the legendary beasts shared the same theme in the second generation, in the remakes each of them received a distinct version of that theme. Take a listen. Volcanion event. There's an inaccessible area in the Kalos power plant that is speculated to have been used to hold an event for Volcanion. As I mentioned in my Pokémon X and Y Iceberg, there's a user on Reddit that goes out of bounds and explores the area, a place with steam and lava reminiscent of a Pokémon like Volcanion. Oddly enough, there's a gate that would connect to another route on the opposite side, but as expected, it leads nowhere. Lugia was made under the influence of drugs. Chief writer of the Pokémon anime Takeshi Shudo is known for having created Lugia under the influence of medicines and tranquilizers. Alcohol helps me make sense of all the lines of dialogue spinning around in my head and for clearing my mind when it's feeling fuzzy and scattered. For some reason when I'm drinking, I can ask total strangers the peskiest questions and it doesn't end up in a brawl. We don't really get into arguments either. It must be this kind of mentality that says, people are people, I am me. So no matter what someone says, it doesn't bother you. If I can't drink, I take tranquilizers. When I get a little bit high, it helps me sort out all my confused thoughts. This process led Shudo to come up with Lugia, a Pokemon he was surprised to see become real in Pokemon Gold and Silver, as its origin lies in the anime and not in the games. The Sea's Legend. The Sea's Legend is an intriguing read found in Canaleve Library in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. If you've played Pokemon Legends Arceus, you may be familiar with Request 66, where you bring a specific team of Pokemon to Seaside Hollow to encounter Manaphy. While the actions in the text seem to refer to the player in that game, this isn't the case, as the legend already existed by the time of Hisui. Who was the first character to meet the prince? Or could it be a prophecy about the main character? Berserk Gene. One of the most obscure hold items in the Pokemon franchise is the Berserk Gene, an item we can find close to Cerulean Cave in the second generation of Pokemon games. The Berserk Gene is tied to the legendary Mewtwo as some sort of signature item that acts as a self-inflicted swagger, as the user will increase its attack 2 stages, with the disadvantage that confusion lasts 256 turns. I guess this item was removed due to the existence of abilities that prevent confusion in Generation 3, meaning that if your Pokemon with own tempo consumed that item, it would be a free source dance as soon as the Pokemon exits its Pokeball. Challenger's Cave Legendary. In Pokemon Black and White, an ace trainer called Beverly mentions that there's a story about a legendary Pokemon that lives in the cave and that it was training its student Pokemon. This has always made me think about one of the Swords of Justice taking Keldeo there to train and achieve its resolute form to become a more powerful Pokemon. There's no follow-up to this story as the cave collapses in Black and White too. Giratina is the devil. Giratina parallels the concept of a fallen angel, a being that rebels against a higher power and is exiled to another plane of existence as punishment. Just as fallen angels are cast out for defying God, Giratina is banished to the distortion world for its violent behavior, representing rebellion and isolation. This behavior is still present in Giratina by the time of Legends Arceus, as it wanted to take revenge against Arceus with the aid of Volo. Also, the number 6 is generally seen in Giratina's design and reminds us of the Christian belief that 666 is the number of the beast. However, contrary to the devil and after leaving Volo's side, Giratina acts as a guardian whose aim is to protect the universe from threats. Arceus. One of the most useless and random things in Pokemon is the question marks type. The only move that was assigned this type was Curse, but it was later changed to a Ghost type move to eliminate any association with this unusual type. This entry is on the Iceberg because Arceus happens to have a sprite for a question marks type, although no plate exists to give the god Pokemon this feature. This type has the property of being neutrally effective by all types and vice versa, but it was removed from Gen 5 onward for obvious reasons. Diancie is a mutated Carbink. Diancie is a very unique mythical Pokemon. First of all, it's the only mythical Pokemon that can Mega Evolve. In that state, it surpasses the base stats of legendary Pokemon such as Mewtwo with 700. Besides, Diancie was originally a Carbink that underwent a mutation process, becoming the mythical Pokemon we are familiar with. Taking into account the transformation from Carbink to Diancie and its ability to Mega Evolve, it seems that this Pokemon has a strong relation to mutations, probably in the same manner as Eevee. Volcanion in other regions. In Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Brandon is revealed to have worked with TV Mobile to produce various television programs detailing the search for the mythical Pokémon Volcanion in the Kalos, Sinnoh, and Johto regions. I wonder why specifically these regions. It would make sense if it were Kanto and Hoenn, as both regions have volcanoes, but if anybody knows, please let me know in the comment section. Legendary Beast theme in Ruby and Sapphire. One of the most popular myths in Generation 3 was that of being able to visit Kanto and Johto from the Hoenn region, and this rumor was fueled by the fact that within the internal data of Ruby and Sapphire, themes from the Gen 1 and 2 era are present using the sound font of the back then new Pokémon games. One of these themes was that of Entei, Raikou, and Suicune, leading people to believe that an encounter was programmed into the games. While these Pokémon were in the game's files, they wouldn't be catchable until the release of Pokémon Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Pokémon Colosseum. The most plausible explanation is that these themes were used to test the GBA sounds. Here's a fragment of the theme. Southern Island Messages. Those whose memories fade seek to carve them in their hearts. These are the words inscribed on a sign at the entrance of the forest of Southern Island, a place where Latios or Latias reside. Once caught or defeated, the player can interact with a sphere in the center that reads the following: "All dreams are but another reality. Never forget." The first message refers to the fear of forgetting and trying to find the means to preserve memories as part of oneself, while the second one is more cryptic. It might mean that dreams originate in alternate existences if we take it literally, or that dreams as in goals are in a parallel reality unless we do something to achieve them. What's your interpretation of these messages? Faraway Island and Mr. Fuji. Guyana, South America. A new Pokémon was discovered deep in the jungle. We christened the newly discovered Pokémon Mew, and indeed on a faraway island dwells Mew, the original mythical Pokémon that helped make Pokémon what it is today. Back in the day, online distributions were unavailable, and the only way to get your hands on Mew was through attending a distribution event. In this particular case, one that occurred in Japan from July 17 to August 21, 2005, where attendees with a copy of the Japanese Pokémon Emerald were given the Old Sea map, an item that would grant players access to Faraway Island where they would find Mew. In the past, I thought this event was also available for Fire Red and Leaf Green in the same way as Lugia, Ho-Oh, and Deoxys, especially since it's a Pokémon from the Kanto region, but in reality you could only travel to that mythical place through the Hoenn region. If you go to the east part of the island, you'll find a sign faded by time that reads September, October, November, or December 6th day. If any human sets foot here again, let it be a kind-hearted person. With that hope, I depart. While in the international versions there's no clue about who might have written this, the Japanese version gives us the kana G. If we go back to the Pokémon Mansion journals, we can only wonder who wrote them, and one of the answers lie in the Pokémon Origins anime. Professor Oak mentions that the diary that Red found in the Cinnabar Mansion could be the notes of Dr. Fuji, a scientist that was said to be the world's foremost scholar in Pokémon research, and that after he discovered a new species of Pokémon, the subjects of his studies grew darker, and his research was soon dismissed because he was attempting to artificially create the most powerful Pokémon. In Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, if you talk to Blaine for a rematch, he'll say that the Pokémon Mansion holds remnants of his old friend's research. And who is Blaine's old friend? Well, not only is Mr. Fuji friends with Blaine, as indicated by a portrait in the Cinnabar Gym in Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green, but also the founder of the Pokémon Lab of the island. There is no room for doubt that absolutely everything we've discussed here indicates that Fuji was responsible for writing those words on Faraway Island, and that also he was responsible for the creation of Mewtwo. Victini in the Crown Tundra. Data for an encounter with a level 70 Victini was found in the Crown Tundra DLC for Pokémon Sword and Shield. This led to a surge of early hunts for this mythical Pokémon upon the DLC's release. The YouTuber Austin John Plays offered $500 to whoever showed him a method to find Victini, but this reward was never claimed because the victory Pokémon was nowhere to be found. It is believed that Game Freak employed this tactic to mislead data miners, especially in an era when uncovering video game secrets has become increasingly easy. Calyrex is colder than Absolute Zero. Absolute Zero is the coldest temperature possible in the universe, and this concept makes a lot of sense if we understand why is it that it cannot get colder than this. Temperature is the result of the movement of particles. The faster they move, the hotter it is. As movement slows down, things start getting cold, but when particles stop moving completely, then we get Absolute Zero as a result. Since there's nothing slower than something that doesn't move at all, that's why a temperature lower than Absolute Zero is completely impossible. And I mean impossible at the level of a circle with 3 right angles being real. However, according to the official Japanese Pokémon website for the Sword and Shield DLC, Calyrex combined with Glastrier can reach a temperature of -300 degrees Celsius. Arceus's 1000 Arms. It is described in mythology as the Pokémon that shaped the universe with its 1000 arms. While legends and myths are often metaphorical, this description may not be far from the truth when considering what is depicted in the Pokémon Adventures manga regarding Arceus creating the Pokémon of myth at the Sinjo ruins. In All About Arceus Part 4, numerous unknown appear in Orbit Arceus. In response to Gold's confusion, Proton, a Team Rocket executive, explains that Arceus cannot create something from nothing. Archer, another executive, adds that Arceus is in the process of creating the Pokémon of myth. Does it sound familiar? It's possible that the unknown are the 1000 arms Arceus used to shape the world, as well as an extension of Arceus's being. As I mentioned in my Pokémon Diamond and Pearl Iceberg, there's a similarity between the unknown and Ophanims, a class of wheel-like celestial beings that guard the throne of God and that are known as the Many-Eyed Ones. The connections don't stop there, as the radio waves found in the ruins of Alph produced by the unknown are very similar to that of the Celestica flute and the Azure flute. Items strongly connected with encountering the god of creation. Who created Arceus? An egg from which the original one was born appeared in the void, and with its 1000 arms it shaped the universe. The mystery of the universe's creation is likely something beyond the reach of any civilization, no matter how advanced, but for now, let's return to the Pokémon universe. The problem with asking who created the universe is that even if we know who or what created Arceus, the same question arises: what caused that phenomenon? This is known as an infinite regress, and as I mentioned earlier, it may be beyond our comprehension. Could Arceus have always existed? Or perhaps it comes from a higher dimension, choosing to materialize in this universe? But once again, these answers only lead to more questions. Shiny legendaries make no sense. We've seen that some legendary Pokémon are unique, or in the case of Pokémon such as Mewtwo or Articuno, we've seen a couple of specimens. Given this, some argue that the existence of shiny legendary Pokémon doesn't make sense. Statistically, it's unlikely for a rare genetic mutation, which typically appears in only a few individuals among thousands, to occur in a population of just 2 or 3. How can we justify the existence of shiny Pokémon like Mewtwo or Arceus? With the multiverse, an element that is confirmed to exist in the Pokémon franchise. With this basically infinite sea of probabilities, there is room for Pokémon to be shiny, even if they are unique specimens, although their existence in a single universe represents one of the rarest occurrences ever. What do you think about the existence of shiny legendary Pokémon? Beta legendary Pokémon. Thanks to different leaks throughout the years, we've been able to see the what-if side of many Pokémon, including legendary. We start with a Pokémon known as Omega, a Mechagodzilla-like Pokémon who apparently was gonna take the place of Mew in Generation 1. The legendary beasts look more like dogs, and they look quite generic if we compare them to what we ended up with. Talking about them, there's an interesting Pokémon that looks like Arcanine if it were really legendary. This creature is speculated to have been the real master of Raikou, Entei and Suicune, but this was later changed when Game Freak decided to include Takeshi Shudo's creation for the anime, Lugia. Celebi has gone through several stages, from being an almost black Pokémon to resembling more its final form. Here we can see a sketch of Groudon that doesn't look extremely different to the final version, and yet we ended up with something so much better. White Dragon doesn't have a visual representation, but its Pokédex entry could be a hint of a beta Rayquaza. However, it could also be interpreted as Altaria. Latican is very unique, as it's a beta Pokémon that split into Blaziken and Latias, something I don't think we've seen before. I guess this means that Latios was a later inspiration after Latias was her own Pokémon. The Lake Trio has the exact same front sprites, but if we take a look at the back sprites, we can see all of them have antennae, and Azelf's head looks different. Regigigas, I have no words for it. Heatran is similar, but it has 4 orbs on its head. Giratina reminds me of Landorus Theory in form and Cthulhu. Darkrai looks like a lost cousin to Ceruledge. Shaymin is less hairy or grassy in this case. Arceus looks like a shadow of what could be its real form, although this we might never know. There's not too much to say about beta legendary Pokémon from the Unova region, as not known sprites or concepts about their designs have been leaked. Although there's no sprite, there was an empty space between the legendary Kalos trio and Diancie, Volcanion and Hoopa. Considering its placement, it could have been an additional legendary or mythical Pokémon that we have no idea about. And finally, Eternatus that resembles a cosmic fish. Sinnoh and Hisui myths. The myths of Sinnoh and Hisui showcase the rich lore and ancient knowledge detailing the creation of the universe, the origins of Hisui and Sinnoh, and various stories that describe the Pokémon world as it existed long before the events of most games. A collection of intriguing tales is found in the old verses, which are believed to have been written by Kogita, judging by the fact that the author describes a friendship with the god of spring and Amorous, Kogita's closest companion in Legends Arceus. This theory has led many to speculate that Kogita either has an extraordinarily long lifespan or may even be immortal. There are also tales told in the many books at Canalive Library. Let's explore some of the most interesting. Old Verse 9. I set the bones of Pokémon adrift upon the river. I let my memories flow on, adrift upon the river, and to the ocean they will flow, perhaps around the world they go. How many bones in days to come will I yet set adrift to sea? While every gift with which I part takes a sliver of my heart. This has a parallel with Sinnoh Folk Story 1 that reads the following. Pick clean the bones of Pokémon caught in the sea or stream, thank them for the meals they provide, and pick their bones clean. When the bones are as clean as can be, set them free in the water from which they came. The Pokémon will return, fully fleshed, and it begins anew. Sinnoh Folk Story 3. There once were Pokémon that became very close to humans. There once were humans and Pokémon that ate together at the same table. It was a time when there existed no differences to distinguish the two. In the original Japanese version of this story, it said that Pokémon and humans used to marry each other, which explains why this detail was altered in the international localization of the games. However, in Pokémon Legends Arceus, we do encounter a case where a man married a Pokémon. A lost journal from generations ago hints at a marriage between a man and a Frostlass, tied to the supernatural legend of the Yuki-onna, a snow spirit from Japanese folklore. Veilstone Smith. A young man, callow and foolish in innocence, came to own a sword. With it, he smote Pokémon, which gave sustenance with carefree abandon. Those not taken as food he discarded with no afterthought. The following year, no Pokémon appeared. Larders grew bare. The young man, seeking the missing Pokémon, journeyed afar. Long did he search, and far and wide too, until one he did find. Asked he, "Why do you hide?" To which the Pokémon replied, "If you bear your sword to bring harm upon us, with claws and fangs we will exact a toll. From your kind we will take our toll, for it must be done, to guard ourselves, and for it I apologize." To the skies the young man shouted his dismay. "In having found the sword, I have lost so much. Gorged with power, I grew blind to Pokémon being alive. I will never fall savage again. This sword I denounce and forsake. I plead for forgiveness, for I was but a fool." So saying, the young man hurled the sword to the ground, snapping it. Seeing this, the Pokémon disappeared to a place beyond seeing. The Pokémon in question might be Giratina, which could explain why the myth mentions Veilstone City, as it is the nearest city to Turnback Cave. Additionally, the Pokémon's flight to a location beyond sight could be referring to the Distortion World. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed or learned something new or had fun, please give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, as well as to the Iceberg experience, where you'll find a lot of interesting icebergs about science, video games, philosophy, series, movies, anime and more. Have a wonderful day and I'll see you in the next one.